So hello and welcome to this edition of Open Source in Oman, a monthly series of video interviews brought to you by the Open Source Center of Excellence in Oman, a partnership between the Oman Ministry of Transport, Communication and Information Technology and Wipro Limited. I'm your host, Gilles Gravier, Open Source Strategy Advisor at Wipro. Our guest today is Othman Mandhari, who is founder and CEO at InnoTech. In your role, you've been very naturally significantly involved in open source activities, which we'll discuss together in our session, Othman. So let's start with an introduction. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the open source world originally?
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here today. My name is Othman Mandhari. I am the founder and the CEO at InnoTech. So I actually started, or I was introduced for the first time ever to the open source back in the university days. I was a student in the College of Engineering in Sultan Qaboos University here in Oman, Muscat. And I remember seeing some of my friends pitching about the open source. And then I joined that society. So it is a non-profit student society. And then slowly I started getting more into this world. I started supporting this world. I am a fan of many open source software. That was 2010, 2011. Today, after more than 10 years, I still use a lot of open source in my business, in my daily life. Even when I worked I used to work in Schlumberger. It's an oil and gas company here in Oman, Saudi, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain. It was a GCC contract, and I tried to I did my best to introduce some of the open source software to my colleagues, my teammates, and wherever I go, I try to promote because I'm really falling in love with this concept of sharing the software, especially for people like students in Oman. When we were at school, it was a bit difficult to fund some of the software, some of the subscriptions, and in the school lab. So yeah.
Cool. It is easy to fall in love with, right? When you start looking at open source, suddenly it becomes just so natural to share and to contribute. So actually, this is tied to it. But what is the main personal motivation for you when it comes to your open source activities today? So has it evolved since when you started?
Okay, so some people use open source because they like the movement, they want to support open source. Other people use it because they want free software. In my case, because I am a mechatronics engineer, my background is mechatronics and robotics engineering. So we do a lot of programming, we do a lot of hardware plus software, and it was very useful for us to start where other people ended instead of starting from scratch, especially in the hardware. And in my case, I believe that if I do something, if I do some work, I'm using it in my daily life, in my business, why not share this work to the open source community and let others continue the work, start wherever I stopped instead of reinventing the wheel. So I like this concept, and I keep until today all my 3D designs, all my I do a little of programming, but most of it is hardware. We keep it all open source. We publish it, and we let the community make benefit of it and develop it for the future generations as well.
Super. And so, in your organization, okay, tell us a little bit the role that open source plays at InnoTech.
Good question. When you work within your organization, you can use a lot of open source when you are not dealing directly with the client. So internally, you can use the Office software. You can use we use the 3D software. We use Blender. We use GIMP, Inkscape, many others. So when it comes to 3D design, we use it because because I'm pushing my team. I don't force anyone to use it, but I'm pushing my team. A few years ago, like if you talk to me like 5 years ago, it used to be difficult to convince people to use Blender, for example, comparing to the non-open source software. Today, that software, Blender, GIMP, Inkscape, those software are getting much better. And in many cases, people use them because they are better. They don't require a high-spec PC. They are free, open source. So our life is easier now promoting the open source. So most of my employees today use open source 3D software, even for the 2D editing, in some office applications. When it comes to dealing with the client, sometimes because they use other software, we have to use the same software to make it easy for communication. But internally, I am happy that we use a lot of open source, and it is a culture that we built together here at InnoTech.
Cool. That's a good approach, actually. It's convincing or encouraging people to use open source, but not making it mandatory. And then suddenly people actually adopt open source because they find that it's a really great way to move forward. That's a very, very good approach. So in your role itself, how did you get to that role, and how does it specifically involve open source?
I didn't get the question exactly. So what role exactly?
Well, you're the co-founder and the CEO, right? So how did you get to creating InnoTech, and how does open source come to play in that achievement and activity?
Okay, so it's a long story. So we started InnoTech actually by making one device. So in our lab in the College of Engineering, there was this huge device that is used to teach students how to do some electrical connections. And it was extremely expensive, although it was very simple. So we thought about, why don't we create a similar device, make it our own concept, and then make it open source. So we started with that product, and I was really happy to see people from other countries. We have people from Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Saudi, and other places use the same hardware or the same design. So that was the beginning. Then we shifted into 3D printing. And again, we did a lot of work in 3D printing, both hardware and software. So it all started back in the university days, just before graduation. We wanted to give people access to those hardware where not only universities can pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for those devices, but anyone with a small lab can fabricate it himself using very simple tools.
Super. Okay. And today, what are the biggest challenges you face in your current role, and what helps you resolve them successfully with open source or without? But what are the biggest challenges, and how do you resolve them?
There is this challenge in Oman. One of the challenges, we are a small country. The population is roughly 4 million people, with 50% of expats. And it is quite difficult to find those quality programmers. And we compete with the government, we compete with the oil and gas industry. So those people hire the best talents in the country. And we as startups and SMEs, we have to compete with them. And of course, it's difficult to compete with those, especially with the government. They have better benefits for the employee. So this is one of the challenges. The way we solve this is by hiring fresh graduates, getting training for those people for over six to 18 months. And by the time they get better, they have this loyalty to InnoTech, to the business, because that's where they really started getting professional. And we solved the challenge this way. But still, I know that many other startups and SMEs in Oman, they suffer from this. Getting the talent, competing with the government and the private sector is quite challenging.
That's a great approach, actually, because you create that loyalty by giving training and giving jobs. And do you actually also contribute to open source projects and make that contribution visible? That's a great way of attracting talent.
Yeah, of course we do, of course. And myself, as so again, I work a lot with hardware because I'm a mechatronics and robotics engineer. Myself, I put all my projects, even in 3D design, even if it is a very simple 3D design that I printed, I just put it as open source in different platforms. My teammates, they started to understand this movement, and they started, whenever they have something, they just upload it where other people can make use of it. Especially here locally, many people started to take those projects and start from wherever the others stopped and make that development. Recently, I have seen some group of students in the same university I graduated from. They were working on this, we call it ROV, remotely operated vehicle. It's a very small submarine that it can be controlled with the remote. It goes under the sea to check the pipelines. And we started this like 2013. And it's good to see that some people today are working on it. And they started from wherever we stopped, the 3D designs, the mechanical calculations, the code itself, the electronics and the circuit design. And by talking to them, I realized that somebody else did work on it as well before them. So this is like the third or the fourth team. Mm-hmm. So people started here to understand that whenever I have a project, instead of putting it on the shelf, let's put it somewhere where there's a potential that someone will come and develop it. And after maybe 5-10 years, I'll see this project somewhere else. And I'd be proud that I participated in this project.
Do you have a central GitHub repository where you post your code or something like that?
So we had this community in the university. Yeah, we had this internal community in the university. In 3D designs, I use BlendSwap. It's a platform where you can put all your 3D files, and you can choose to put them open source or not open source. It's up to you completely. I choose to put them as open source in BlendSwap. There are many other platforms. Some of them are local with the community here, with the makers community. Some of them are international, like BlendSwap.
Okay, super. All right. Apart from the project that you work on, do you have a favorite open source project?
You're talking about the 3D printer itself?
Sorry?
Which project you're talking about?
Whatever you want. What is your favorite open source project in the world?
It's in the business or anything else?
Anywhere.
Okay. I think it will be Blender 3D. Mm-hmm. I use it a lot because, again, we started in the university to use some non-open source software. It was, my device was, the specs were quite low, so it was difficult for me to use that software. And then I started using Blender. It wasn't that good at the beginning. Today, I can say proudly that Blender competes with the non-open source software. I know many people that use Blender today, not because it is open source, but because it's one of the best options they have. You can do the 3D modeling, the rendering, animation, all of that can be done in the same software. So I like Blender. I do contribute sometimes in Blender. I use GIMP as well. I use Inkscape and other software, but my favorite is Blender, definitely.
Cool. And by the way, this session is all done on open source. I'm using OBS to generate this fancy layout of images. I use Shotcut, which is a video editor to then assemble and cut things in and out. So yeah, this is a world of open source where you find really the best products are available in open source. I do remember the early days of Blender, where it was really hard to use and not super functional. But yeah, indeed, it has become one of the best tools for 3D creation, actually. So really good. As a first, if you want, conclusion, do you have an ask for our audience? What could they do to make your open source activities easier, better, more efficient? If you were to have one question or one ask to the audience, or two or three.
I think we should focus on the new generations. I like whenever I go to school sometimes, some universities, I think we still have a lot of work when it comes to raising the awareness about open source. It is sad to see that some university students in their second or third year, and they are not introduced yet to open source. They don't have to be programmers. Again, anyone can use open source today. So I think we should focus and invest more time and effort in raising the awareness for school students, even university students, and even the public, everyone else, on why it is important that they think of open source and why we should raise the awareness among others, especially the young generations.
So a lot of education to be done, right? Communication and education is where you think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe to conclude, and this may actually have been answered previously, but if somebody were to ask you how to start contributing to open source, what would your suggestion be to them?
There are many ways, and to start, it depends who are you. Are you a programmer? Are you a hardware engineer? The first thing you can do is by testing whatever is available, giving feedback. The second thing, if you are a developer, you can develop your own hardware, software, and contribute to the community. And of course, there are those who don't have this background, but they can contribute to paying few dollars per month or even annually by subscribing to support the open source. So those small, let's say, this small donation to this software or that software, it doesn't require a lot of effort, and you don't have to be working out there. It is just a very small amount, but when it comes to the community, we have hundreds of thousands, maybe millions around the world who would like to support the open source. But if everyone does the same, if everyone contributes with the little minimum amount of contribution, it would mean a lot to the developers, because developing softwares like Blender, GIMP, and others, you are competing with corporates that invest millions on their software engineers. Mm-hmm. So to keep up with that competition, we have to keep helping out. And I'm not talking about helping like paying huge amounts of money, just few bucks per month or annually. That should be enough.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Othman, for taking the time to answer all of my questions. It's a super interesting experience to see how a startup grows and lives with open source, using open source, creating, contributing to open source. So thank you very much. I'm super happy to have been able to do this session with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And by the way, I like the background you are using. It's in Mandhari, very beautiful place.
It's a picture I took during one of my first trips, actually, to Oman.
Interesting.
Yep. Interesting. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Mm-hmm.